All right. Good evening, everyone. As you're logging on. Oh, and I hope everyone is trying to stay cool in this beautiful fall weather of 102 degrees. So welcome. It is 6:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Special Education 101. This is the Family Resource Center's first webinar of this year. And I want to take a moment to tell you just a little bit about the Family Resource Center in case this is your first time joining us. The Clovis Family Resource Center is a part of a network of what we call FRCs. We love our acronyms in special education. And so there's a network of 47 family resource centers across California. This one happens to be a part of Clovis Unified School District. And so I'm housed with our early intervention programs, that's birth to 3, offering families as a support as they navigate the IFSP process. And then as families transition or other families are in special education, then in receiving those services, I support them there as well. You will see here on the screen, there's my email address. I would encourage you to follow us on social media because I post lots of resources, not only of our own, but from community agencies as well, my partners. And so I like to share out resources. There is the Clovis Family Resource Center page and then the YouTube channel where many of these recordings are available. So I'm going to let Ginger Cook, our guest tonight, introduce herself.
All right. Hi, everybody. So like Leanne just said, my name is Ginger Cook, and I am one of the lead psychologists in our district. A little bit about me. I have been a school psychologist for, I have to go based on how old my kids are, for about 20, 21, 22 years now.
Wow.
And started in Visalia and then came to Clovis Unified about 12 years ago. So I absolutely love working in our district, love the people, love the educators. That was part of what brought me here was the commitment I saw with Clovis educators and their passion and drive for working with their students and families. So that was what made me kind of come over and make this switch. So I'm excited to be here tonight. So thank you, Leanne, for hosting this.
Thank you, Ginger. And I can say that I've been in many an IEP with Ginger, and I appreciate her family-focused lens. It always helps families feel so comfortable to see someone who's invested. And so that's why I reached out to Ginger and I said, let's partner to help our families understand more about this world of special education because it can be so much. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are in webinar format, so your screens are off, your microphones are muted. That will help limit distractions and also protect privacy. That being said, you can have a snack and you can be in your jammies, whatever you feel comfortable with, and we won't know. So you're all good. We want you to be comfortable tonight and feel welcomed. So to ask questions as we go along, on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that Q&A feature. There's a little button. Sometimes you might have to highlight over it to get that little black screen to pop up. But you click on that button and you can ask a question and that will come to Ginger and I. We're going to more than likely just hold the questions until the end and then we'll tackle them. But we'll be monitoring that as we go along. There's also a little closed caption option down there. If you need that, you are welcome to click on that button and then you'll have closed caption going along the bottom of your screen. And then we have the chat feature. I know most of you are probably familiar with that. We're going to use that more just for participation. If you put your questions in there, they are more than likely going to get lost, okay? Because sometimes that chat can get going. So again, use Q&A for your questions, but we will ask you to share information in the chat as we go. So recording, yes, we are recording tonight. And as I mentioned, you will receive a link within the next 48 hours. You're going to get an email from me to that email address you registered with, and it's going to include your certificate of attendance, the link to handouts, and the link to the recording of tonight's presentation. It will also be on the FRC YouTube channel, so you can watch at your convenience. There is a survey that will pop up at the end. You'll see, take this survey. Please take it. Honestly, it is just a few questions, but your input really does matter to me. It helps drive how Family Resource Center services look, right? If I'm meeting your needs and what I can do better. Disclaimer, this presentation is for informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. Family Resource Centers provide parent-to-parent support. That means parents of children with a disability supporting other parents. And so use accordingly. So we're gonna dive right into the big overview of special education. What is special education? That seems like such a basic question, right? But what it's defined as is specifically designed instruction at no cost to parents. Remember that, it's free, designed to meet the unique needs of a child with disabilities. So programs are regulated by both federal and state law. That is a whole nother webinar. But what I want you to notice as we go along tonight is I put these little red push pins to help you to identify things that I want you to really remember. And that special education is a service, not a place, okay? So as we tackle special education, one of the things I get from families a lot, and it is confusing, is what's the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan? You hear those terms thrown out a lot. I get calls from families that will say, I know my child has some sort of plan, but I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's an IEP or a 504. I say, okay, well, let's dive into that. But a general way to remember this is that if your child's disability doesn't interfere with their ability to progress in general education, and they don't need their education modified, right? Their curriculum modified, then a 504 plan is a plan that can make accommodations, and that's designed to level the playing field for students with a qualifying disability. There's a different set of laws that govern them. It's a whole nother webinar that I provide every year, and I put the QR code, and you will get this handout. So don't feel like you've got to memorize this all tonight, okay? But I put a QR code if that is something you'd like to learn more about. This is the recording to last year's 504 plan webinar, because again, there are very significant differences for qualifying for what services your child gets. It's completely different. And so, but it's something that I want you to be aware of, because it is a topic of confusion often for families. So I mentioned accommodation modification, right? Accommodations are designed to provide a student with equal access, but they don't fundamentally alter standards or expectations. So Ginger, could you give us an example of what an accommodation might be?
Sure. So an accommodation might be, the way I kind of explain it is I give myself accommodations all the time. So if I sit down and I have to write a really long report, I might chunk that report into smaller sections for myself just so I can stay on task, or so I don't, get too tired and start doing a bad job. So we do the same things with kids. We can do that with any kid. Let's say it's math, and I always tend to choose math because I just hate math so much. But if I give a kid a math paper, um, and it's a really long paper, and I know that's going to frustrate them, I can say, hey, do the first 5 and then take a break, and do the next 5 and then take a break. That's an accommodation. A modification would be where maybe the class is all working on multiplication, but that student hasn't yet developed that skill level to do multiplication. We're still working on addition, right?
Mhm.
So I might give that student, instead of in a multiplication page, I might give them an addition page. We're going to get to multiplication eventually. We're just not there right yet. So I modify the assignment, still doing math, still doing things about calculation, but it's a different standard. It's a different like skill that I'm targeting. Does that answer your
Perfect.
question?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, as Ginger said, in general, 504 plans, they're not going to modify the curriculum, right? But IEPs can modify and accommodate. And so that's one of the major differences that we're looking at. So, what are special education services? So in California, children are eligible for services from birth to age 22. And those services can look very different depending on the age. As I mentioned, I'm housed with our district's early intervention team, so Early Start. Now, those are services birth to 3. Again, this is just in general because everything to do with special education, it's almost like there's a bullet point, but right? There's always outside of the box situations. And so, but I'm trying to keep this really simple tonight and a general overview. So, birth to 3, typically, unless a child has a solely low incidence disability, children are going to, that whole service is going to go through the regional center system in California. And so the regional centers are going to assess, they're going to qualify, they are the case managers. And then at age 3, school districts then are responsible. Okay, so ages 3 to 21, children may be eligible for special education, and that's considered Part B. Part C is that birth to 3. And then students that don't get an IEP could be eligible up to age 22. Did I say an IEP? I meant a high school diploma. Thank you. Good job. So all
I
these
got you.
acronyms, I'm telling you. So again, families often, maybe at 4 years old, say, I've got some concerns about my child, or maybe the doctor noticed some developmental concerns and they reach out and they say, I want to get my child assessed, but I don't know how, right? And we'll get to that in a little bit. But sometimes families are surprised that at age 3, children can be assessed for educational needs through the district. So the history of IDEA. IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, is a federal law, and that really opened the doors to serving students with special needs. It was reauthorized in 2004. There were a lot of changes made, but it still fundamentally does the same thing. It just had some things broadened to it. Currently, there are almost 7 million children in America that have an IEP. In California, you see there's 385,000. And in Clovis Unified alone, we have over 5,300. So some key points of IDEA. Remember a little while ago, I mentioned free. So that's that term FAPE, to provide a free and appropriate public education to all children with disabilities, and to guarantee children with exceptional needs an appropriate assessment by trained specialists. Another key point would be that that program, that IEP, is unique and based on that child's needs. Due process procedures, those are called your procedural safeguards. They help resolve potential differences and disagreements. We'll get to that in a little while as well. To provide an IEP written by a team that includes parents, their representatives, specialists, and administrator. One of the things that took me a while to learn was that as a parent, I'm a member of that IEP team. And so later on in this presentation, we're going to talk about how important that is, that we as parents be equipped and prepared to participate, so we can effectively advocate for our children. So lastly, and again, this is not all of IDEA, these are just some highlights, but to provide children with special needs an education in the least restrictive environment. You might hear that term, LRE, and that is a topic that families can, sometimes struggle with, because and I'll pause for a minute here because I really want to tackle this a little bit. Least restrictive environment is, general education, and we'll talk about this as I go on to the FAPE continuum. But least restrictive environment is general education, right? But there's a continuum, and we'll address that in a minute, about what gets more restrictive and more restrictive as services intensify. But we as parents really have, we're the experts on our children, right? And what may be least restrictive for one child could look very different for another child. So that's where it's important that we work with our teams to, help determine what is that, where can that kiddo learn best? And the professionals that are in that school system and are the experts on the programs and the services being provided, and really collaborate to develop an IEP for our unique child. There's not one standard carbon copy IEP that goes along with a diagnosis, right? Or a category of eligibility. It's all unique based on those child's needs. So the FAPE continuum is evaluation, again, by trained specialists, identifying present levels and areas of need, and then, if eligible, measurable goals, where those services will be delivered, and then educational benefit. So that's just that FAPE continuum to give you a visual of how that assessment process works. So speaking of assessments and eligibility, we're going to turn it over to our psychologist, Ginger.
Thank you. So I just want to piggyback on something you said and just emphasize it again, is that special education, as we go into this, and this is something that I hear from parents a lot, like we kind of grew up with special education looking one way, right? At least I know, my kids tell me I'm 100 years old, but I'm not that old yet. But way back when, it looked very different than what it does now. And just to kind of reemphasize, it is a service, it is not a place. And so kind of think about that, as kind of have that in the back of your mind as we are going through this whole thing. And I know a lot of people become very like hesitant and afraid that we are going to take their kid, and special education means moving schools, or those types of things. And sometimes that's true, but most of the time that's not the case. So we're going to kind of go through kind of start to finish what the process looks like, and it's a lot. It's confusing sometimes, so please put in the chat kind of answer those as we go through. So when we are starting, so if I was at a school, and where this whole process starts is there's some type of referral that's made to me, to the school. So either a parent can make that referral, a school staff member could say, hey, I really think we need to do a little digging on this because I have some concerns. So we can have a referral that's made by a parent or made by a school staff member. And then our obligation is, once we get that referral, we need to respond somehow. And we respond by what we call an assessment plan. And I think we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail here in a minute. So I'll kind of hold off on the details here. But we generate an assessment plan. Once you sign that, that gives us permission to do an assessment. And we're going to do an assessment in all the suspected disability areas. And we're going to cover those in a minute, what those are, what those look like. And then once we get our assessment done, we hold a meeting with you to say, here's what our assessments found out. We talk about if eligibility is there for this particular student. If they are eligible, develop a plan. If they aren't eligible, we're still going to talk about how we can meet their needs, right? So I think sometimes parents get really worried too that, well, if I don't have this, then there's nothing there for my kid. And that's just not true. Special education is a service that we offer, but we also offer other services at school sites as well. But we can only assess with your permission. So that's key. So we will never do an assessment without having down talking with you and getting your written permission. So, and stop me, Leanne, if you want to jump in here at any point in time.
You're doing great.
But, okay. So how would you go about requesting an initial assessment? There's several different ways you can do this. You can contact the speech therapist, school psychologist, the administrator, your child's teacher, and let them know that you would like your child assessed to see if they have a disability and if they would require special education services. It's always super helpful for me to know what your concerns are. So sometimes if I just get a blanket, like, I want my child to have special education, that's good, and I'll start rolling with that. But I need to know what you're seeing, what concerns brought you to that point. And then that helps us create an assessment plan, because there's thousands of tests that we can choose from out there to give us to a student. But knowing the concerns, it really helps me narrow in on what assessments I need to give to really hit and evaluate your concerns for your child. And then, as always, I know I have worked with Leanne on several cases, and the Family Resource Center, please take advantage of that. There are lots of good trainings, but just Leanne being able to come to a meeting if you have concerns, or you just feel like, I just want someone on my side of the table sometimes, because I hope you always feel like we're all on the same side, but I know sometimes those meetings can be intimidating. So Leanne is a great resource for that. And also too, kind of the pin there is emailing. I know that always really helped me, and will also help you, just so we can keep track of when things were done. Putting things in writing and dating things is always a really good way to help us track when you requested, because and I think we're going to go into that next, but dates matter in special education. So we can go on to the next one.
And yes, I just wanted to jump on one thing too, is
Yeah.
that sometimes just this process right here, families can get frustrated at. I worked with a family this week alone that, was really struggling because they thought in their mind they had requested an assessment, verbally shared they had concerns, right? And so then, but the teacher, didn't necessarily understand they were literally asking for a special education assessment. She thought it was more of an inquiry, like, what do you think my child, might need some extra help? And so again, and the family contacted me and said, well, I thought I was asking for an assessment and then I found out I wasn't. And so again, that's something very simple I can help with, right? I can jump in, I can reach out to the team and help get that going. And so that's just one simple way that it can be a source of frustration. I'm going to tell you, I struggled with that as a young mom. I was told, oh, you can go to your school and request a speech assessment for your 3-year-old. And so there I go to my local school and I requested, and the person at the front desk said, he's not even old enough for school. We don't do that. And so I went back on my way back home and had, no idea that she at the front desk was mistaken and didn't know. And so there was this barrier, right? I went home and it took a whole nother, well, it was actually kindergarten before he actually started, you know, getting speech services, because I didn't understand how to navigate that. And so again, if you have questions and you feel like there are hiccups, please feel free to reach out to me. That is, I'm here for that support.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up a good point back to your slide that talked about contacting your speech therapist or school psychologist. When we hear those words, we're going to be especially attuned to that, where your teachers may not, your classroom teachers may not. So, ask to, I think your administrators, your school psych, your speech therapist, they're going to be listening with a little bit different ear than a teacher might. So it's a good point, Leanne. Thanks for bringing that up. So, like I said, in special education, dates matter. It's nice to have things written with dates on them so we can start, because here's what we want to avoid. We do not want to prolong any more than we need to getting a child help and support. So in IDEA, there's certain timelines that they give us to initiate an evaluation, to complete the evaluation and hold the meeting, because once we've identified that a child has some difficulties, some struggles, like we all do, right? We need to jump in there and we need to give support. So when I receive the request from parents, and let's say I received it today, I'm going to have 15 days from today, and that includes calendar days, not just work days, but 15 days from today to respond to that somehow. It might be shorter than that. It might be tomorrow, but 15 days. And what I'm going to do is I'm either going to give you an assessment plan that outlines all the different areas that we're going to assess. It won't say like what tests we're going to give, but it will tell you, oh, we're going to assess their speech and language skills. We're going to assess academic skills. We're going to assess intellectual skills, social emotional behavior, those types of things. There's certain areas on the assessment plan. And then we sit down and we go over that with you, answer any questions you might have. Or if we feel like there are times when potentially we get a request for assessment and for various reasons the school team feels like I don't think we're at that point, it may not be we may not be at the point of doing a special education assessment, there's other interventions that might be appropriate that we haven't tapped into, or other reasons, then you'll get what's called a prior written notice, which tells you why we won't be assessing. But either way, we have to provide you with two documents, one saying, yes, we're going to test and here's what it's going to look like, or no, we're not going to assess and here's why. So once those are signed and received back at the school site, so we look at the date that those were, once they're received. So if I send it home tomorrow, the assessment plan home tomorrow, but we don't, and you sign it tomorrow, but you don't give it back to us until a week from now, we go based off when we got that back at school. So then if you send it in on Monday, so it's 60 days from Monday on, and that includes calendar days. So in that 60 days, we do a whole lot with that kid. We are, depending on what the need is, we're doing a lot of assessing for that kiddo.
Right.
They get tired of us pulling them out of school for. And so that's our timeline. So just kind of keep that in mind. It will be, it's not going to be, it shouldn't be a prolonged turnaround, but it will take us some time to get that evaluation done. And so what our evaluations consist of? We have different systems. So here's the confusing part, and I'm so sorry. I don't know why they did this, but we have different systems and different categories, like different ways we find a student eligible, but we have used the same, people have used the terminology in different systems. So for example, we in education, we have a category of ability autism. And then, but in the medical model and in the clinical model, they also have an eligibility of autism, but with different definitions. So that gets confusing. So we're going to go into all that in a minute. But school districts are the only ones who can determine eligibility for special education. Medical providers can't, outside evaluators can't. It's only school staff who do that. What we don't provide is diagnoses. So I can identify in a kid, in a student, hyperactivity or inattention, let's say significant hyperactivity and inattention, but I cannot diagnose that student with ADHD. That's beyond my scope of practice. But we definitely do, if that student has a diagnosis, we definitely want to hear about that, get all those reports. We want to take all of that into consideration when we're trying to develop a plan for this student. So very different systems. Sometimes it gets hard and overwhelming to navigate those, but we will help you through it, I promise.
Absolutely. I will tell you, as a mom, that was one of the most confusing things to me, was trying to understand, when I hear the doctor say, oh, your child needs PT, but then this, the IEP team says, oh, no, we're not going to provide PT, and first off, just even understanding how different that medical model versus the educational model looks. It's not the same type of service, number one. But number two, just understanding that just because your child qualifies for an IEP doesn't mean they're going to qualify for regional center, doesn't mean that they're going to qualify for SSI. I mean, everybody has their own eligibility requirements and the services they provide. And that, as Ginger said, we're sorry, parents, because that is hard. It is hard stuff to navigate, but again, you're not alone, and we're here to help. Okay.
Okay, so in special education, in IDEA, there are 13 eligibility areas that we can evaluate for. So I don't know out there, I can't see all the faces and know all the names, but if you ever look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it's like a book like this thick, right? Lots of diagnoses, lots of lots of everything in there. For special education, on the other hand, we have 13. And so I'm not good, we don't have time to go into all of those, but when kind of back to what I talked about before, when we send home that assessment plan to you, and this is why it's really so important for us to know what your concerns are, what you're seeing as an area of difficulty, is that it helps us determine, as part of that piece of that puzzle, to say, what are those eligibility areas that we need to be evaluating for? And we'll make sure that we get all of that on the assessment plan and then structure our assessment the right way, so that we hit all the areas we need to hit to really kind of delve into each student's abilities and areas.
And Ginger, and it's not going to be just the school psychologist, right? There could typically be other a
Yes.
nurse, other team members, and we'll go into that as well. But it really is a comprehensive assessment. And do you you're not just pulling a student and assessing them one-on-one per se? Are you also doing like observations in the
So,
classroom, talking with the teacher, right? So kind of
yes.
trying to get a full look at that child, right? Not just how they perform on your standardized test, right?
Right. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'm more than my test scores, right? I know that. I know all of us are more than numbers in our test scores. And so for us to, I really rely on, test scores are one thing. What I really take from that, yes, test scores are important, but it's how did the child perform those tasks when I'm watching them. When we go in the classroom and we watch them, let's say they're being referred for a reading problem, and I'll go in there during reading instruction and hear them read with their teacher, watch them do those tasks. If it's a social emotional problem or behavioral problem, I'm going to go to the time of day where that problem is occurring, and I'm gonna be there so I can see it happen in real life, and to get some ideas about the environment surrounding that behavior problem, so that I can say, ah, there it is. And sometimes that alone will help us go, problem solved. If we make these little tweaks right here, we maybe have solved this problem. A lot of times it's a lot more complicated than that. But it starts to really kind of give us the picture. And let me just tell you, the parents that I work with are so important to me. So I know what home is like. Like, you guys can tell me, this is the times they do really well. Like, this is when I see them perform the best, or I know if I do X, Y, and Z, they're going to have a really hard day. So during assessment, the parents are so important in that assessment process to me, as is the teacher, so that we, like you said, Leanne, we get a whole picture of the child. It's not just a test score, it's how they're using those skills that we test for, how they're using those in everyday life.
Perfect. Thank you, Ginger.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of back to eligibilities and all the things, right? So this is, again, it gets really confusing for parents. And I'm so sorry. And I feel like parents also too, like, and me as well, like if I went to 4 different trainings about eligibility and diagnosis, I'm probably going to hear 4 different opinions about this. So, which makes it even more confusing. But just so you know, a medical diagnosis does not mean that a child is going to qualify for special education services. We are definitely going to take that into account. That is part of that assessment process, is to see how does that diagnosis that child has impact them in the educational setting. For sure, we're going to look at that. But just know that doesn't automatically mean that they qualify for special education services, nor is a medical diagnosis required for special education services. In my head right now, I'm just thinking of multiple cases I've worked on where a parent, or not, where the parent had been told by somebody at some point in time, oh, you have to have a diagnosis in order to get special education services. And then services were delayed until that diagnosis was given. And I just felt so terrible for them because that didn't have to be. So just know, a lot of times we have these things happening simultaneously too. We're assessing, and the parents like, I think I'm going to go take them to their doctor because I think something else is going on here. So sometimes we have both of those things happening at the same time. So you definitely do not have to have a diagnosis in order to start an assessment or qualify for special education services. But again, share those medical records with us because it's so important to our assessment.
Right. And, Ginger, what you just said too, that's one of those things that I hear families get tripped up on a lot, right? Whether it's on social media or that friend of a friend, well, my cousin's second, cousin's brother said that, and I just think, oh no, you don't need that. But like you said, I often, when I'm working with families who are new to figuring this out, and I'll say, you can, as you said, you can request an assessment through the regional center. You can request an assessment through the school district. You can request an assessment through your doctor. Those are all different systems that provide different services, like we talked about. And while they can support each other, right, that information from each other, you don't have to wait one for the other. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, a knowledge check. Okay, friends, I had this cool poll I was going to launch, but I'm sharing my screen, so I don't know if I can. You may need to do it, Ginger. Can you scroll to the bottom? And you and I could just stop sharing. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Here we go. We're going to problem solve, friends. Okay, so we're going to launch this. It's just 2 little questions, and we're going to see how we're all doing on what we've learned so far. Do you guys see it? Anyone?
No? I see it.
Oh, okay. I was scared for a minute. There we go. And so we're looking at FAPE stands for, is question 1. And we're split. No one thinks that it stands for Fresno Area Public Educators. What? But and then our second question is, parents can request an assessment of their child to determine eligibility for special education. Oh, and we got 100% on that, because the correct answer is if they suspect their child has a disability that impacts their education. Good job, everyone. The answer to the first one, FAPE, stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. All right, thank you, everyone. Good job. All right, now I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, now we're back. So,
all right.
Now, IEP meetings, Ginger.
Yes. Those are fun.
Lots of fun.
Again, IEP meetings can be one of those things that can be for a parent. I totally understand. There are times it can just seem really overwhelming, and maybe a little frightening as well. And I really like it when, just kind of on a side note, for parents, I mean, I always want you to feel, I always hope parents feel so comfortable with our teams that they walk in there and they just feel, like at peace, with the people that are in the room with them. But I also know that that's just not the case in every situation. So I encourage parents, if there's people that are your support system, to bring those people. I know Leanne has come to some meetings and it's really helped out. It just, you have kind of that person there who, even after the meeting, you can bounce ideas off and talk with. Always know you can always call your school psychologist and do that. But IEP meetings can be intimidating sometimes. I hope they're not. So let's kind of dispel some of those myths right now, and maybe get you a little bit ready for that to happen. So reason we have IEP meetings is we're always going to have what we call an initial IEP meeting. So whenever there's an assessment done, we're going to have an IEP meeting to review those. And we talked about the timelines earlier. Once a child qualifies for special education services, we are going to have a meeting every year. We can definitely mean more than that. So there are often times for students we need to meet for various reasons. Lots of different reasons we can meet, but we at least are going to meet every year to say, these are the goals we've created. Let's look at how much progress we made and what do we need to do differently, stay same, shift around, not do those types of things. That big assessment that we talked about, the one where we send home the assessment plan and looking at all that stuff, that gets done every 3 years, where we're going to look at eligibility again. Do they still need special education services? Do they still qualify as having a disability? Our hope is always we can say we work ourselves out of a job. That'd always be great, right? But we will do that big assessment once every 3 years. Transition planning. So our students who are older, we have to hold IEP meetings. Sometimes those are included in your annual meeting, but we come up with a transition plan to get the student ready to leave high school and go on and do the other things in life they're going to do. And then we have something called the 30-day review. So, or an interim placement. So that's when a child moves to a district from another district. So move from Unified to Clovis Unified. We would have 30 days from the day they enrolled to hold an IEP meeting. So what the purpose of that is, we want to get all of that student's records and review everything as a team, and you're part of that team, to say we want to make sure we're giving them all the services they need. Now, here's the beautiful thing about IEPs is IEPs are mandatory district to district, state to state. So if my child had an IEP and we pick up and move to, I don't know, where somewhere I want to live, Michigan. Let's say we picked up and moved to Michigan. They would have to implement that IEP in Michigan. So, and it's that 30 days where they have to do what we call like placement. So even when you move, they have to get that IEP and go, oh, they were receiving this many minutes of this service and this many minutes of this service, and those have to be done. At that 30-day mark, things might need to be changed or shifted based on what your decision and the school team's decision is, but that IEP will never be changed without your permission.
Okay.
Also, things we don't love are what we call manifestation determination meetings. And this is when the student has engaged in a behavior that is a violation of education code. And it's either causing increased days of suspension, or there has been one of those behaviors has been significant as defined. There's a few of those that are defined in ed code. And so what we need to do as the IEP team then is we sit down and we say, okay, was this action or was this one action or these actions over time, were those behaviors related to the disability? And if the team decides that they were related to the disability, then it's our obligation to come up with the right behavior intervention procedures to support that kid in the school system. If we determine that the behaviors, in fact, were not related to the disability, then that kind of sets off another path. But we have to sit down and have that conversation with you as parents to say, what is it that we're looking at and how do we best support your child and our student? And then we have amendment meetings. So amendment meetings can happen for so many different reasons. But basically with an amendment meeting is us saying, there's some things in the IEP that we need to change. So we don't want to wait until May to have the annual IEP. It's October or almost October, which is crazy to me, but it's almost October and we feel like these changes need to be made now. So we can hold an addendum or an amendment in your part of that and we can make changes to that IEP. But again, no changes made unless you have given permission. And then if you request an IEP meeting, kind of your little pin there, you can request an IEP meeting at any time. Our obligation is to meet within 30 days of your request. Okay.
Yes.
All the different members of an IEP team. So you, general education teacher, special education teacher, and people who are providing services to your students. So that could be school psychologist, physical therapist, occupational therapist, whoever is a service provider on that IEP is a required member. A representative from the school district is also a required member. So that might be a principal. That might be a GIS. We call, well, they're vice principals. We call them GISs. Leanne talked about that today. Maybe we have in special education, we have a position called a program specialist that kind of oversees, that person oversees several different schools. And then you as parents are allowed to bring representatives, or if we would like to invite somebody, we as a school district, we need to reach out to you and get your permission to invite them. And then if appropriate, the student to come to an IEP. I will tell you though, I always like to be able to talk to the parents with just us at first, just so we can just freely talk about things and then bring the student in. But as students get older, I think it is good that they participate in their IEP meetings if appropriate. Oh, and the excusal. So let's say in an IEP, I double scheduled myself, let's say, and I was going to be 30 minutes late to the IEP. I can't be 30 minutes late to that IEP unless I have your approval to do that. So what I would do is I would call you ahead of time, let you know about it. If you said, yeah, Ginger, that's okay, then you would sign a partial excusal. If I was going to be gone the whole thing, I might request that you sign a full excusal. You have the right to say yes or no to that. You have the right to say, nope, Ginger, I want you there the whole time. Or nope, I want you there, period. Right? You have to be there. So a required member is required, and we can't just not show up. If we do, we have to have your permission to do that and go over our information with you ahead of time.
Right. And that's where, it's hard too, because, as parents, we understand things happen, right? Team, the school team, they've got children likely at home that might get sick, things can come up, but it's also that big moment typically we've been waiting for, right? And we want to hear from that speech therapist or whatever. And so it's just something that you have to, if that does come up, think about that. And it's important for you to understand you're right, that you don't have to excuse them. You can request that it be rescheduled. There's also lots of instances where maybe you don't feel that person is vital to that meeting right then, and gosh, this is what I really wanted to tackle, right? And so it's okay, I understand, but it's important for you to understand you're right about that. Okay.
All right, so our IEP agendas. We will typically, when you go to IEP meetings, it's going to follow the same flow a lot of times because, well, just because it does. So typically in an IEP meeting, we do welcome and introductions. We'll talk about why we're there. Signing for attendance. So this also, and we're going to talk about this, I think, a little bit later too. The sheet that you give consent, there's a P where you're going to give either consent or say, I don't consent to this IEP, is the same page that you sign in just to say, yes, I was here. So in the beginning of the meeting, we might have you just sign that page that says, yes, you're here. That does not mean that you're consenting to the IEP. So kind of like buying a house, we're going to ask you to sign your name in several different places. But that the sign-in sheet for attendance is just to say you were there. And at every IEP meeting, you're going to be offered your parent rights, your procedural safeguards. You have the right to say, I don't want those. I have 1,000 copies of those. Don't want any more. But we will always give those to you when we have you sign an assessment plan. So those, you can have as many of those as you want, but we're required to offer them. We then go over any type of assessment reports, and if there was assessment that's done, each of the people who did the assessment is going to go over what the outcomes, what they took from their assessments. Everybody does it a little bit different. And so if you, and a lot of times our reports use some technical jargon. So I always ask parents, like, please stop me if I get in that mode of talking about, if I get too technical, because sometimes that's just, my brain just goes that way, you know, and I forget sometimes. So I love it when parents ask questions and are like, tell me what that's for my kid. What is that going to look like? And then because it just helps us understand kind of your child better, and we can have better conversations about that. And then some other things we're going to talk about. So all of our assessment reports, that information goes into what we call present levels, which it kind of highlights different areas of functioning for all kids, their academic functioning, their like daily skill functioning, their social emotional behavior functioning. And our assessments, be it a test I'm giving them, observation, interviews, we should be able to answer all those questions. We're going to go over all of that with you. From that's what helps us say, oh, there's some areas that we need to work on here. And that then leads us to our draft goals. And we call them draft goals because we're going to, they're not permanent. They're not actually final until you give us the okay. So we will develop draft goals and we'll talk about how we're going to attain those. We're going to get your input on that. That leads us to, once we develop the goals, then the question is, well, how do we meet these goals, right? So then we talk about services, accommodations, supports, all of those things. And then if there's some type of transition, if the student potentially is moving to a different school site or a different classroom on the campus, we talk about how to facilitate that transition, to make that as seamless and as possible for that student. And then at the end, we will about your consent. And parents, just please know you have the right, just because we hand you that paper, you should always be told you can think about it, go home, talk to people you trust. Hopefully you trust us too, but talk to other people you trust. And then, you know, because we want you to make an informed choice and informed decisions about the IEP. And I have parents all the time who say, yeah, I really agreed with this part, but not this part. Can we talk about this part here? And we love those conversations because it helps us refine that draft IEP so that when you walk away, you feel really good about the plan set forth for your kid. And we feel good as well because we're all working together as a team to help support your child.
Okay, the IEP document. Is that me, Ginger, or is that still you? I can't see the page numbers.
That is the components. Let's see. I think that's me. I think.
Okay, it's still you. There you go.
Just a few more. Sorry. Okay. Wait, I think.
I
What
think
slide
you're
is
right.
this?
We're going with you.
Okay.
Tag, you're it, friend.
Okay. I think we're on slide 30. I have two more. Okay. Sorry, everybody. So the object of an IEP. This is the plan for your child's education and help them moving forward, right? In meeting their academic and educational goals. So we are always going to break it down into those small steps and to get to our larger goal. We're going to talk about what are we going to do? How is this going to happen? Who's going to do it? For how long are they going to do it? To what intensity level? And so this is where it gets really individualized. So I like, from my perspective, I've never written a behavior plan that looks just like another behavior plan. Sometimes my interventions might be the same, but how I use those interventions for every kid looks very different based on that child's need. And based on the environment that they're in. And so no IEP is going to look like another IEP. They're going to look very different because no child's the same. And so it's pretty linear when you think about the whole process. We start with assessments. Assessments then help us establish our needs, which we call present levels. Once we figure out needs, then we develop the goals. And then those services really kind of drive everything else, right? All of our interactions, time, all of those types of things. Components of an IEP, kind of, again, this is where I think in the IEP process, like, people start to get really overwhelmed. You know, there's lots of pages, there's lots of different parts to this. But if you can just remember that linear step, right? It all starts with assessment, and those assessments should all drive the identification of need and goals, and our goals drives our services. So once we do the assessment, we're going to talk to you about, does your child meet eligibility criteria for special education? And there's two things we talk about. Do they meet criteria, but also, do they need special education services? And those are two I would say, if you tested me, I'm probably going to have a processing weakness. All of us have processing weaknesses and processing strengths, right? But does my weakness require special education services? And that's what we're looking at for kids. So we're talking about information and eligibility, right? Do they require special education services? Our transition plans, like we talked about, present levels is just going to highlight all the different areas and any needs that we've seen. Our special factors page is kind of an important page in my world, at least. It identifies, are there things that stand out from this kid or for this student that are maybe additional difficulties that they might be having. So this could include a student who has very, very limited language. We're going to need to get them some communication devices. A student who might be hearing impaired, or those types of things. We're going to need to get them maybe some specialized supports in the classroom. A student who has really significant behavior difficulties, we're going to have to do some additional things for that kiddo to help them be able to access education on a daily basis. And then we talk about statewide assessments. If that student needs any accommodations, we're going to spell that all out in the IEP. I think we've already talked about this a little bit. So our goals, Goals are a hugely important part of our IEP. That's what we're going to actually work on with the student, right? When they come and receive special education services, that's what our teachers, our staff are going to be working on, is helping that student meet those goals. The services that we offer, that's called, again, FAPE, free and appropriate public education, right? We want to make sure that our services are appropriate for that kiddo. The educational setting, where do we deliver those services? And that is such a broad spectrum. We have some students that receive special education services, but they never leave the general education classroom. So the special education support staff goes into the classroom, the general education classroom, and provides support in that room. So we have some students who never leave their general education classroom. So that can look very different for every kid. Because of COVID, we now have to do emergency plans that state what we're going to do if schools shut down for more than 10 school days. We are still going to educate children and uphold their IEP, and then at the very end, we will ask for consent. And I think you talked about this a little bit earlier, Leanne, is just our continuum of services, least restrictive to most restrictive. All students are general education first. And even when a student has special education services, that is a general education student with special education services. They are always considered a general education student. And then we give them the type of supports that they need. Like I said, you could have a student who's 100% in general education and getting the support there. We also have some students all the way that require residential placement and facilities for various reasons. So very wide spectrum of services that special education offers.
And to jump in, I think, again, there's a lot of confusion over this sometimes when, parents talk that, again, the category of eligibility or even your child's diagnosis, right? That doesn't drive this. Their needs do. So you could have two children with autism, let's say, for example, that have very different looking IEPs, right? Based on their needs, or children, with, let's say, Down syndrome. I'm trying to think of, more common diagnoses or categories. And so sometimes, parents will feel like, well, that child, has the same, diagnosis as my child. Why are they getting this and mine isn't, right? And so I think it's just important to remember that it's all based on our child's needs and having those conversations with your team. Two children can, even again with very similar needs, their own uniqueness can drive things. Like, for instance, one child just may be a social butterfly, and boy, they over that interaction with with all their peers, and they love the rallies and all, every opportunity they can be with their general ed peers, boy, they thrive on that, right? And another child, that could be so detrimental to them, that could completely overwhelm them. And anyway, and so again, it's just having those conversations about your unique child, right? And how they're best going to be served. Oh, the signature page. Oh.
All right. So last for me is the signature page. So we talked about this. See, the top part of the page is where we talk attendance. That's just going to be signing in, saying I was here. When you get kind of in the middle of the page, there's a long line. Then below that, get to consent. And there's options for parents to choose. Like, I consent to the whole IEP. I consent to the IEP with exceptions of. I consent to none of the IEP. And so there's there's not lots, but there's several options there that you could choose from. So Yeah, so that is the
Right.
IP in a
Uh,
nutshell.
Right. And they're going to ask, did you feel you were included, right? In this conversation. There's also
Yeah.
that Medi-Cal box. There's a lot of confusion out there
Oh,
about that as well. Um, I'll let you
yeah.
tackle that, Ginger.
So the way I explain it to is if I wanted to go and in the community and get my child assessed for these tests, right? There are people in the community who will do this, and I would have to pay them. As a school district, like Leanne talked earlier, we do this for free because we are for free. If a student is Medi-Cal eligible, what this has allowed us to do is we can bill for those services and get some reimbursement back, which goes right back into supporting kids. Um, and so we ask permission to do that. If a student is, it doesn't affect Medi-Cal eligibility. If a family is Medi-Cal eligible, it will not affect their Medi-Cal eligibility. If it doesn't have Medi-Cal, um, obviously it affects anything. Just nothing happens from that. So, but we ask your permission to do that because we want you to know what we're doing on behalf of your kid. And then there's just other boxes on there that talk about when you get reports, we'll mark all that stuff off saying, yep, we gave you. And yeah, but that's your signature page, and that's the final page of the IEP.
All right. So preparing and partnering. I chose this visual here because it really is keeping the student at the center of it all, right? That's what all these meetings and assessments and um, wringing our hands are about. So getting ready as a parent, again, we're the expert on our children. So that's one of the most important things that we're bringing to that table. So one of the things that I just have such a passion for is making sure families feel equipped to share all that important information about your child. Um, Often, it doesn't matter how well we do know our child, when we get into these meetings and we start to get all this information, I think of it like an important doctor's appointment, right? We've been waiting and all this tests have been done and we want to get the results and we want to figure out what the action plan is going to be. And what our questions or what we want to contribute can kind of go out the window because we're so busy as parents trying to take it all in. I can remember struggling trying to even figure out who was who at the table. Here's a whole, table full of professionals, and I'm trying to keep straight. Now, was she the speech therapist? Who is that? Right. And so there's just a lot going on. I highly encourage you that in the weeks before the IEP, just keep a tablet around, be jotting things down. Okay. Um, Again, all those things that you know about your child, what their strengths are, what your concerns are, your questions. If your child already has an IEP, review the current one, right? And so you can kind of compare what does this new one that we're working on look like? What's been changed? Use a binder for paperwork. I offer, and I'll get to that at the end here, but on the Clovis Unified website, I have an IEP binder you can download. But also, if you have one of your own or another agency has one, just even if you don't understand all that this is encompassing yet, having all your paperwork in one place, I promise you, is a game changer. Mommy
Mhm.
to mommy to daddy. Okay, I'm telling you, it's a game changer to just help you feel equipped to participate in these meetings. All right. Um, Also, side note, my little red push pin down there. A binder is really handy to have. That binder is handy to have accessible at home, because what if, grandma and grandpa are watching, the kiddo, and there's an emergency, and they've got to take them to the doctors, or anything happens, right? To have that, all that important information in one place and accessible is very handy and important. Okay. So getting ready again, you can ask the team to send you a draft copy of the IEP, and any assessments a few days ahead of time, so you can review and come with questions. You'll see I put down there, there's a lot of confusion over this. I hear parents say that they, schools have to do this. It is not a requirement. There isn't a law that says they have to do that. But I'm telling you that most teams will definitely try and meet that request, to get that to you ahead of time. And the more notice you can give them, that, hey, I really would love a copy of the draft ahead of time, they're going to try and make that happen for you. Okay. Meetings should be scheduled, for a day and time that's convenient for everyone, and that's including parents. Consider, as Ginger said, bringing someone with you who knows your child. Often, regional center service coordinators will come and attend your child's IEP. Again, you want collaboration. If your child's receiving ABA, right, invite them to your meeting. I work with families all the time who maybe their children receive outside mental health support, or maybe they're with a foster adopt agency and they've got those social workers involved. You're able to invite those people to have everybody collaborate and be on the same page to support your child. You have the right to audio record it, the meeting. If you have to give 24-hour notice to the team, but you can do that. Sometimes I'll have parents say, oh, but I don't want to seem adversarial. It's not adversarial. I, as a mom, honestly, to try and keep track of everything that was said and what I thought was said, and then you listen again and you think, oh, that's not what happened at all. And so it's just a way to help support you, especially if you can't bring someone with you. If maybe, your spouse isn't able to come, and you're doing this on your own, it's just an option. You don't have to do it. But sometimes that helps parents feel comfortable. Other things to think about. Please feel comfortable to ask questions. As Ginger said, if you don't understand something, it is perfectly okay to stop and say, excuse me, I don't get that. What are you talking about? Again, as Ginger said, the professionals, they're doing this all the time. They've got all those initials after the end of their name, right? This is their expertise and this is their language. And sometimes they just need that reminder that I have no idea what those initials mean. I also encourage you to read through each page. Again, this is a legal document that drives services. Also, do the assessments capture an accurate picture of your child? Sometimes, I will be in IEP and then, and I'll know from my conversations with the parent that not at all does that capture what they anticipated it would look like. And so have that conversation. Say, I see that my child has these mobility issues. Maybe can we talk about what that seating at their desk might look like? Or how are they going to get from the playground out to, to the restroom? Or what are those logistics going to look like? It's okay to talk about that. That's what the point of this meeting is, right? Is to make sure that this plan, look at this, passes the stranger test. I cannot stress this enough. What can happen is often, a team might be really good at supporting your student, okay? But if it's not written down to where someone else could pick up that IEP, like Ginger said, right? And get that same picture of what your child needs, it needs to be written down. It needs to be a part of that IEP, okay? And again, you don't have to sign at the meeting. You can take it home and review it, process it, come back and ask more questions, right? Often I'll hear the psychologist will say, here's my email. If you want to take it home, review it, email me, call me, ask me some questions. It doesn't mean you have to have a whole other IEP meeting, or you could. There may be enough concern that you do have to come back to the table and meet, okay? But again, it's being comfortable enough to have those conversations. So, procedural safeguards, again, these are just the highlights that as a parent, you have the right that if you don't agree, and you will notice that whole continuum that Ginger talked about, from assessment to implementation, right? There's lots of areas that are a potential disagreement, okay? And there are, again, procedures in place to address that. First off, again, it's at that team level and talking to the team and sharing that. But these are just a few of the highlights of your parent rights. You have the right to request an independent evaluation, saying, I don't agree that this evaluation captured my child's needs and I'm requesting another. Your right to prior written notices, to parental consent, to accessing your students' educational records, and how disputes are resolved. So give yourself a hand, you made it this far. IEPs are, as Ginger said, can be hard. There can be a lot of emotion involved. And honestly, these are our children we're talking about. I can remember full well feeling absolutely overwhelmed at the thought of a whole room full of people discussing my child's medical needs, right? And it felt so invasive to me. Like, all these people know about our family history, or my child's, medical conditions. I mean, it was hard. It was hard emotional things. And sometimes attitudes, and as Ginger knows, I present to professionals in our district as well, to give that parent perspective of how hard IEPs can be on parents. Things did not always go well in my children's IEPs. Sometimes we had teams that honestly, I didn't have to think about anything. They were so nurturing and so loving that literally I personally was like, whatever you do during that 7 hours, I know you've got this, okay? But then there were times where it felt like there were walls, there were barriers, and even though I didn't know a lot legally back then, I knew it didn't feel right. I knew that even the attitude, right? The dismissiveness, or someone coming to the IEP meeting unprepared and not even understanding my child's diagnosis, right? That was a deal breaker right there for me. And as far as destroying trust. And so as parents, this can be a lot to navigate. And so I just encourage everyone to have grace with each other, try and collaborate. At the end of the day, this is about getting a good plan in place to support our child. And one of the things I think it's so important for families to remember too, that I often would in the very beginning felt like this was my one chance, like this moment, right, was going to lay out the entire school year, like da da da, insert, dramatic music, right? And it took me a while to learn that's not true. An IEP is a living, breathing document, okay? And so if in 6 weeks things aren't going well, it is okay to reach back out to the team, or they might reach back out to you and say, we need to come back to the table. This isn't working like we thought it was going to work, right? And so it's just having that communication and that collaboration to really work these things out. So I put this together because I want you to understand what an IEP should not look like, okay? So I use some of these, fun little images because I've seen all of this in IEPs before, and this could be a parent, this could be a professional, this could be anyone at the IEP, right? And I feel like I've been all of them at one point or another. But it shouldn't feel like this, okay? It shouldn't feel like this. It shouldn't feel us against them. Again, we are a team. If it doesn't feel like that, then that's a red flag, okay? Something's going wrong. And so reach out to the Family Resource Center and let me see how I can help. Partnering is power. And again, we have educators on this webinar, we have parents, but being a good listener, right? And that goes for everyone there. As the professionals, they can get busy. It's so, this is part of their job. They're going down, checking their to-do list, right? But as parents too, we need to be good listeners and really try and hear what everyone's saying and be respectful and kind. I often say, okay, advocating doesn't mean being adversarial. You can advocate. We're supposed to advocate for our children, right? We're parents. That's our job, is to advocate for them. It doesn't mean tearing people to shreds. And again, I say that both ways. I've seen professionals that, get their feathers ruffled, right? And I think to myself, oh, we need to take a breath. We need a 5-minute break. And so it's just, again, thinking of that image that this is all about our child and collaborating effectively. It does not always mean we're going to agree. And I guarantee you that there are going to be times, more than likely, that there could be disagreement, but that's okay because there are things in place to resolve that. All right. So speaking of which, what if I don't agree? As I said, there are many components to this process, which can bring an opportunity for disagreement. These are a few suggestions I have for you. One is communicate clearly what your concerns are. Again, I will talk to families on the phone. They'll call me, and I might spend an hour on the phone listening to what they're upset about. And I'm taking my little notes. And at the end of that hour-long conversation, I've bullet pointed, there's really about 3 things they're upset about. Okay. And so I'm working with families to help them understand, okay, so let's communicate these 3 things that you're upset about. Let's communicate that to the team to get your actual concerns addressed. And I say that again, as a parent, sometimes we can get so scattered on the big picture, and it's like, well, but what is it that you actually are upset about. Let's figure that out and let's address that. Okay. So it's important to communicate what that is. If you can't resolve that at the classroom level, again, reach out to your program specialist. Now, I'm going to give the disclaimer again. I know there are families on here that aren't in Clovis Unified. One of the things that's very confusing is that different districts use different terminology. As I'm helping families, maybe they're leaving Clovis or coming to Clovis Unified, and I'm reaching out to my partners in other districts. I'm trying to navigate. Well, what does that mean in another district? What is this person called? And it is hard. But in Clovis Unified, as Ginger mentioned, our administrator over that site is called a program specialist. Okay. You can continue with another IEP meeting to try and resolve it. Sometimes that will help. Refer to your district should have an alternate dispute resolution process on how to resolve disagreements. Ours for Clovis Unified is on our website. And then refer to your procedural safeguards as well. At any point on these steps, you can reach out to the Family Resource Center. I also want to share, if you aren't in Clovis Unified and you're wondering, well, who do I contact? Again, I shared there are family resource centers across California that serve everywhere. There are also family empowerment centers, parent training and information centers. If you don't know who to contact, please feel free to reach out to me. I will happily connect you with the agency in your area. Okay. Because again, we want you to feel supported. We don't want you to feel frustrated and I don't know where to go. So on the Clovis Unified website, I just have this little image of, again, it's a little hard to navigate, and that's why I put step-by-step instructions as to how to get there. But once you finally get there, I have some resources on the website that you might find helpful. Also, I want to encourage you, as we're almost done, that again, in October, October 15th, Ginger and I are going to hold an in-person workshop. And that's where we're just going to go deeper. It's not going to be formal, it's not going to be a presentation per se. It's more an opportunity to really come and get those specific questions you have, maybe that are more complicated or deeper than just this overview about your specific child. If you want to come and spend a couple hours with us and chat, and we'll have some refreshments, and I'm going to give an IEP binder that I spoke to you about. Every family that attends is going to get one of those to help equip you to participate. But again, that's just another opportunity to go deeper. So we're going to do a little knowledge check again. I want to just kind of go through back to our key points of IDA and make sure we addressed all of this, okay? And then we're gonna stop screen sharing and we're gonna dive into your questions. So we discussed a free and appropriate public education. So I often I feel for families, childcare is so expensive, right? And often preschool is so expensive. And so often when a child qualifies for special education preschool, families, the first thing they'll whisper to me is, how much is it going to cost? And I'm like, no, it's free. It's a free and it's part of their education. It is, so, but again, so there's no charge for any of this. We discussed how it should be individualized to your child's needs. It is not a rubber stamp based on their category of eligibility or diagnosis or what Johnny next door has. Um, to provide due process procedures, we discussed that. To provide an IEP written by a team that includes parents. So again, parents, you are important members of that IEP team by law, okay? Your input matters. And to provide children with special needs and education in the least restrictive environment, this is important, that is appropriate to meet their educational needs. Okay, so that's going to look different depending on your child. So lastly, real quick, I know we've gotten to a couple minutes after 8, but one of the things I want to share with you is getting involved. The Community Advisory Committee, if you haven't heard of that before, every SELPA, which is a whole nother acronym, but is required to have a community advisory committee for special education. There's no cost. It's not the parent teacher club. We don't do carnivals or candle sales. We're not going to ask you to, wash cars. It's nothing like that. It's an opportunity for parents, community members, staff to come together and have input and discussion about special education and the special education plan in our district. Okay, it's an hour long. There's 4 meetings a year. We give you a sandwich lunch. It really is an opportunity to connect with other parents, and principals are there. Again, special education administrators. It's just an opportunity to really connect with, the people that special education, that's our world, and we want to improve it. So there's the way you can join. By joining, again, I'm giving the disclaimer, you're not, it just means I'm going to add your email to my email list. I send out the meeting notices. You're going to get updates on things like this event and other special education events that are relevant to our parents, okay? But it's not a commitment. I promise I won't knock on your door and say, you signed up. Why haven't you been at a meeting? It's not like that, okay? But we do encourage you to attend because it isn't, even if you just came to one and checked it out, all right? So questions. Remember, we're going to have our Going Deeper workshop on Tuesday the 15th in the evening. And at the end of this, we're going to, you'll see that survey. So here we go. I'm going to stop screen sharing and let's see, we've got some questions. Let's see. Ginger, did you see any of these in the chat? What other assessments does the school offer to evaluate, like an ERMS assessment?
Yeah. So actually I was trying to respond to this and I braced and I respond again,
Sure.
because it's a big one.
Yeah.
There are, I don't even know all the types of assessments that we do. We have so many different specialists from licensed mental health clinicians to people who do very specialized things in speech and language with assistive technology, to occupational therapists, physical therapists. So basically, to answer that, I hope this answers that question. We will do an assessment based on that student's needs. So we have so many different specialists in our district that we will start tapping into those different specialists and put them on the assessment plan, if to vet out that student's need and to figure out what we need to do. So ERMS assessments, and for those people who are like, what's an ERMS assessment? That is a educationally related mental health assessment. And for that, we have people who have additional training to help us out with that. So yes, we offer lots of assessments. So lots of different types of assessments that could drill down on a student's needs. So I hope that, I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it does.
Mhm. Let's see. Does our child need to attend Clovis Unified School to attend the in-person meeting? No, you don't have to. Again, Family Resource Center, I'm sorry, excuse me. It's open to everyone. You're welcome to come. Let's see.
So how many times in a year are you able to call a meeting? As many as you want. So that is, you know, I would much rather a parent call a meeting and say, hey, I have some concerns, I would like to talk those out, than not. I'm a parent, I have 3 kids, and when I have concerns, I want to be able to talk to the people who are working with my kids and have them, you know, see them on the daily basis. So as many times as you feel like you need to get your questions answered and your needs met.
Okay. Do the assessments have recommendations on how, or do they drive goals? Sorry.
No, you're good. Absolutely. So in our assessments, and this has kind of changed over time, but kind of different. Anyways, yes. So in our assessments, there will be either in the assessment or in the IEP itself, there will be recommendations on how to best meet your kids' needs, and that could be either in the assessment report itself. It could be that those are summed up in the accommodation section of the IEP, but basically when we're looking at our recommendations, those are all kind of summed up in our goals. So there's different types of recommendations. Recommendations could be about how to implement a service, like what do they need, what type of accommodations do they need, versus recommendations on what to work on. So you might see both of those type of recommendations in the IEP and in the report.
Okay. Can you have, I see there's some about timelines and a little, some that are going a little deeper, right? So I might encourage you to come to the in-person, or you can email myself and I can connect with Ginger. We can get your more detailed questions answered. I want to be respectful of everyone's time right now, but lastly, I did want to tackle this one from Jeanette. Can you have an IEP again once you sign agreeing to stop with services?
Can you have an IEP again once you sign agreeing to stop the services? Yes. So the question to that would be well, I should say this, potentially. So once a parent says, you know, I don't want these services anymore, or the school says they don't qualify anymore, and you agree with that and sign that IEP saying your child's exited from special education, we can always come back to the table and do a reassessment to see if they would still meet that criteria. And it happens sometimes that, well, a couple of things happen. So we might assess that kid or that student every 3 years, and we might find that they're no longer eligible for that service, and they don't need this service. So then that's one way exit happens. Sometimes parents also just decide they don't want their student in that service anymore, and so they can sign them out. But once they are signed out, once that agreement is given and we want to revisit it, we start the assessment process all over again.
Right. There's a couple more questions that are pretty specific. But again, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So what we'll do is I'm going to capture these questions, and then we can, well, let's tackle this one because this is pretty general. Ginger, can you request to observe the evaluation and/or assessments, or get copies of the assessments evaluation so parents can understand how the goals are made?
Sure. So typically we don't have parents or anybody else observe when we are doing an evaluation. And the reason that is because the tests we're giving are very standardized. And like I can only say very specific things. Like if I was asking you a question, like what is the color blue? That's not a question I would ask, by the way, but that's just something that came to my mind. And I could only say it with the words they are given in the test manual. Like it's very structured. And so we don't typically it's not recommended that we have other people in there because it could really throw off the assessment
It can
process.
skew it, right? It can skew the results, having a parent around. Think about just to give you, not to interrupt, Ginger, I'm sorry, but I'm thinking in parent terms. Think about like even how sometimes, dentists don't want you back in there while they're doing something because children will act so differently, right? When you're in the room. That might be a really bad example, but I was thinking children can act differently with their parent in the room. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it is, right? They're going to act different. Either they're more comfortable, they're more nervous, they're whatever, but it can skew those results. But
There is,
go ahead.
well, there is, and there is like one test that it's a test that looks specifically at autism. And we will have parents in the room when the kid's much younger, like when they're 3 years old, or those types of things, because that's important. That child has pretty much only been around the parents. So, but typically no. But anything that we do in the assessment, this is an important question. So we get protocols, right? That's what I'm writing all my stuff down as your child answering questions. You have the right to see any of that and to go through any of that information with me. So if I gave your child a intelligence test and had the protocol and you're like, well, I want to know how they answered these questions, absolutely. Let's sit down and let's go through that. And I can show you the question and I can show you how they answered it. And we can go through all of that together. And so, if I was doing that assessment, I will go into as much detail as you want, probably more than you'd ever want to know. Because I geek out on that stuff. It's all very interesting to me. So, yes, so we would take you through that as much as you needed to know to how we got to that goal recommendation in the end. We would go through all of that.
And then, of course, as we talked about in the IEP process, you're going to get copies of those assessment reports, right? So all that information that specialist compiles, whether it's the nurse, the teacher, the psychologist, whoever that is, right? You're going to get a copy of each of those assessment reports as a part of your IEP document, right?
Yes. And then I also saw a question that said, did your child need to attend the IEP meeting?
Oh,
and
yes.
The answer is no.
No.
They don't have to be there. And again, typically I like to have some time with just the team and the parents to talk freely. Because some of the information that we're discussing is sensitive, right? And I want to be able to give you, the parent, the whole picture, and then you decide with us. You decide how much you want to bring your child into that conversation, how much you want them to have access to that information. So that's never something I would do apart from you. I would definitely include you in that if you felt like that was like necessary and important to bring them to the meeting, but you don't have to.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to capture if there's any Adriana, I saw you had a question too. We'll address that sidebar, okay? But other than that, I think we just about got everything. And I want to log off so everyone can get their survey done. And we will see you hopefully on October if you need to go deeper and bring your questions. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you, Ginger, for spending time with us and helping us tackle this very big topic. All right, everyone. Have a
Thank you,
good
everybody.
evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.